welcome to Adoptee Cuento. Welcome where we talk about Filipino adoptees and all other adoptee topics. And today we have an amazing, great person, Anna. Anna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
I'm so excited to talk to you about your background, understanding how adoption has affected your life and some of the amazing things that you're getting into. I know that you also run your own workshops on processing adoptee feelings and what do adoptees do. So I'm totally excited to get into this. Please share with us a little bit about a background.
Thank you so much, JD. I'm really excited to be here. A little bit about myself. I was born in Jakarta in Indonesia, and I was adopted as a 1-month-old or 30-day-old baby to Stockholm, Sweden, where I grew up. And today I live in New York, and I've lived here for over 20 years. It's been a long journey that's not hasn't ended yet, and probably will never will. And I'm really excited to share more about my background and what I do.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I know at least with transracial adoptees, we have some sort of understanding of adoption, but can you give a little bit of background on your family, your upbringing? Where did you grow up? And then how did you kind of understand your adoption story?
Sure. So I've always known I was adopted. I think that would have been really hard to keep from me taking I grew up as the, child of color in a white family. And Sweden at the time was also very white, a very homogenous, society, very old country, right? And I was born in 1976, but because it's late in the year, I arrived in 1977. And so my childhood was really in, like the 80s. And back then it was kind of just normal, that I looked different, but I was still Swedish. And that's what my parents told me and everyone else told me. And no one really kind of pointed out that I was any different. So I don't think I thought about it much. I also grew up in a family that, my brother was adopted, a domestic adoptee in Sweden. My dad was adopted back in the 40s, also domestic
Oh, wow.
adoptee in Sweden. So the only person who wasn't adopted in my family was actually my mother. So I think adoption was obviously a very natural thing for us, but it was like we were a family of, non, biological people to one another.
So as a family who's really familiar with adoption, did you guys talk about adoption, what that means, any effect on, right, kind of the bigger understanding of how families are formulated?
We were always told, right, that, that family, you can make a family in different ways, right? Because that's what's also like my dad's background of being an adoptee. And it didn't really matter, right, how you came to be together, because you were a family, and like what mattered was like how you cared about one another, how you treated one another, all of those things. And I also think because my grandma on my dad's side, who adopted my dad, like they were also really close. Like my grandma on my dad's side was very, warm, and like my mom and dad were very affectionate. Like we can't come from a really like we hug type of family. And my grandma, my mom's side wasn't like that. So I think we bonded in that way also, that I didn't feel out of place, or adoption didn't feel out of place. So I don't think that that's also part of why I didn't question it. My brother questioned it more, only because I think we had more information, right? So we knew more. I'm not going to go into his story, but like we knew more about his birth parents. So it was easier, right? So like when my brother asked questions, my mom could answer. Like she could actually say, this is what happened, this is what's happening. you know, like you don't have to, you know, worry about XYZ. Versus like my dad didn't know anything about him, and he did his adoption, and I don't think he really cared, right? Like, and he just knew that like when he was 6 months, he and actually his twin sister were adopted. So it was like my grandma adopted my dad, and my grandma's sister adopted my dad's twin sister. So they grew up together. Anyway, they separated, you know, siblings back in the 40s. So me, I didn't have any information. I mean, like I had very little information, I should say. So I'd already asked those questions, right? Those are like normal questions, like who is my like biological mom? Why did she give me up? Like, you know, but my mom and my dad could only answer so much because they only knew so much. They're like, this is what we know.
So with adoption being a prevalent part of the family, right, story, did that personally kind of help you to accept? Was it easy for you to accept it and not necessarily have an issue or struggle with it, or did you still struggle with adoption?
When I was a child, I don't think I struggled with it in a way that I was aware of it. Like, I think a lot of my behavior struggled with it, like my reactions to things. But I don't remember myself struggling about it, like asking or, you know, feeling confused or, you know, having these kind of types of memories of feeling that I didn't belong or anything like that. I think partly it is because my, you know, majority of my family was adopted. So, you know, knowing that you have a dad who's adopted, like, you know, this is just kind of like part of how we do things, right? And that's totally fine. I think I did have a lot of, you know, like when I was a little, like small child, um, like my mom quit her job for me because they couldn't leave me anywhere. Like it was absolutely, it was impossible. I would just cry and cry and cry. And you know, things like that. Like my mom, you know, even if she worked like 20 minutes walk away, like it just didn't work. When I didn't see my parents in the room, it was like, now I understand. I'm like, wow, that was like a real like panic for me. Like we would go to friends' houses and I would sit with my parents where all the kids were playing, and I knew all the kids, right? And everyone wanted to play with me. And I was like, I want to sit with my mom and dad, you know? So behavior wise, I think, you know, like that is stems a lot from like separation, and you know, and I had a really, you know, I shut down a lot of times when things get really hard, and my mom would call me stubborn, that I was like a really stubborn child. And now looking back, understanding more of like the physiological effects of separation, I understand that I wasn't stubborn. I was protecting myself, even in an environment like where she was very supportive. I have very loving and supportive parents. So I did start struggling more as a teenager, and those are very sensitive years, right? Like Sweden also changed in the 90s, like so the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, the landscape looked different. All of a sudden, it's not just like blonde and blue-eyed Swedes. Like, you know, things are happening in the world, like the Eastern blocs are falling in Europe. Like there's so many things going on in Europe and all over the world that people are coming as immigrants and refugees to Sweden. And in the beginning of the 90s is all of a sudden like the largest amount of, you know, non-Swedish people that we've taken in that are coming not for work. Like, you know, historically people will come maybe from like Poland or wherever to go to Sweden and work, and then I'll go back. But this was a different situation. This is like mass immigration. So that changed the landscape of things. It also changed my understanding of, you know, what othering is. Seeing other people who are coming from these countries with, you know, same hair color as me, they're looking different. And I've been told, you know, things like that doesn't matter. Like you're Swedish, you know, your skin color doesn't matter, however you look doesn't matter. And all of a sudden, I understand that these things matter, right? Like Swedish people are, you know, they don't want those other people here to come take our things. And even in my my own family, which at that point had shifted. My dad passed away when I was 10. My mom met someone new. And in my new family constellation of my mom and her new partner and his children, who were also teens, there was a lot of, talk about, people looking a certain way and therefore they are a certain way. Yeah. So what we today call also microaggressions, it was not the word, that word didn't exist back then, but yeah. So I think it just changed. So my adoption story definitely, or my understanding of struggling of being an adoptee definitely changed as a teenager.
Got it. So it sounds like the race and the cultural differences were a discussion much later in life versus earlier. Throughout any of the process while you're in Sweden, were there resources for adoptees regarding adoption or racial discussions, differences, or was that something that you wish that there was more of?
Well, Swedish people, they don't, well, at the time at least, like they don't see color. So
Got it.
the racial understanding and even culture understanding wasn't really there. They've been so far up north, they've been able to, for so many years, right, maintain this homogenous society. And it wasn't until like the beginning of the 90s when all the immigrants started coming that things like that changed. And because of that, there was no language around it, there was no vocabulary around having like new cultures and other people in there. So instead it creates like a divide, right, of like us and like Swedes and like the other people.
Got it.
So when I as a teenager, it was hard to navigate those things because on one end I was told, if people were joking about like making jokes about, people who have black hair or look different or like that they like, or just telling like, people from these countries, they smell, people from these countries, they're like this. And but in that same breath, it would be like, but not you, right? So it's like, you're like, okay, like it's not me. And there were no real talk about, race or racial differences, or because it was still this idea of like, you're Swedish, you're Swedish, you're Swedish. So I worked really hard to be Swedish too, right? Like when the more microaggressions, the more racism, the more all of this that there was, and I had it in my own home. Like I had, I would hear, like my mom's partner say like, oh, Asians, they're short because they're meant to pick rice, things like that. So the more I heard like that, the more I felt like I had to be Swedish. So I wasn't even interested in like, I didn't want to be any other. I didn't want to be Indonesian. I didn't want to be a person of color, which I don't even know if that is the word that we called it back then. I wanted to be Swedish about like, because what I didn't want to find out was that if race does matter, what does it mean? Does it mean that I'm not smart enough? Does it mean that, it is true that brown people of who has, brown skin are like have less IQ? Does it mean that all of these things that have kind of directly and indirectly I've been informed by society, family, institutions around me about like people of other countries and colors and all of those things are just different. And I didn't want to know that. Like I wanted to be Swedish. I didn't want to be like that, person who didn't know anything.
So it sounds like a lot of self-discovery through teenage years and then coming into adulthood. Let's talk a little bit about your discovery through your adoption story and understanding that at an older age. Are you interested in learning more about your birth family? How does that all come into play?
It wasn't until a few years ago where I started to, there were a lot of things happening, but eventually I was like, I want to go to Indonesia. So I planned a trip, and then I was like, okay, I can go, let's go in like 2020. That was like my thing. And then COVID happened, of course, so I couldn't go. And I instead ended up in a very unexpected journey, which was coming out of the fog. Like, I want to know everything. So I ended up in 2020, pretty much along when COVID started, with first reading Nicole Chung's book, All You Can Ever Know. And I think after that, like the first chapter, something just broke in me. And I was like, wow, like I didn't even know that someone, like there were actual words on these, feelings and things that I felt my whole life that I really try to control, because as an adoptee, or at least in my position, like I feel like I had so many rules about myself, and that the rules was to protect myself, and I didn't understand that, to like not feel, to not be, to not acknowledge. So then I read the book. I started to listen to a bunch of podcasts about on different adoptees, and then I contacted and found this organization in the Netherlands run by two Indonesian adoptee women, Anna and Christine. And the name of the organization is Mijn Roots, I think how you say it, but it's My Roots. And they help Indonesian adoptees search for their first families. So I called them up and I sent them my papers, and I was like, hey, I don't have much. Do you think that you can help me? And I get an email from Christine, and I said, yeah, and she says, I think we should talk. And I knew, like, when she said, like the email was so short that I was like, that's all she has to say. So we did end up talking on Zoom, and she's like, I don't know how to really, she's like, how much do you know about, adoptions from Southeast Asia during that time? And I was like, not much, like they said, whatever I had in my papers. And then like there was, my mom gave me up the day after I was born. I was with this woman, Ms. Liz Darmaji. I think she had an orphanage, but I'm not really sure. And then a nurse flew me to Sweden, and then I met my parents. That's kind of what I got. And she's like, yeah. And she starts telling me about, the corruption and the illegal adoptions, the all of it. And I did not expect that. Like I had prepared for something completely different, right? Like as an adoptee, I'd prepared for more of the personal thing, like how it's going to feel if I find my first family.
Did you also take a DNA test at that time?
I did everything. I did 23andMe, Ancestry. I asked this person, what are they called? Genealogists. To help me. I couldn't find anything. There's nothing,
And that's how you found out that you're partly not just Indonesian.
Yes. I'm partly Filipino. Both the Ancestry.com and the 23andMe, that's around like 70% Indonesian and 30% Filipino.
That feeling of when you find out this new information about you, that takes some time to like process, right? Because you're like your whole life, you're thinking, okay, I'm Swedish now, but I'm also Indonesian-ish, but that's much later. Now, a whole new side to your story, that how do adoptees process all of these emotions that you're not probably dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I process things through art and through dance and through movement, and that is the language that I feel most comfortable with, because it's a language I don't really have to figure things out or explain, and it's also very fluid, right? And which mirrors a lot of the landscape as I see it and as I experience it. So while I can say, was I in retrospect, and I could say at the time too, that, I was very angry, I was very frustrated, I was very disappointed, I was really I felt betrayal when I, came out of the fog and learned about like the corruption and all of these things. There was also a huge amount of curiosity, right, that came along with finding out that part of you is Filipino, and the kind of like the thread that starts happening in your head of like what shoulders am I standing on, what is the cultural roots that are sitting in my DNA, like where's my, how do I carry myself in the world to like carry myself with pride, not just for me as an individual, but for my, birth culture and possible cultures. And there was a lot of mixture of emotions and feelings that at first I just needed to like sit with it, which was really hard. I mean, I did have professional help, therapy, both individual and group. And I was really lucky to have an adoptee competent therapist who was somatically trained and also like kind of regular trained. So I got a lot of, I got to be in my body a lot, which worked for me because that's how I work. So I process things, by feeling, by like textures and sounds, and, being able to like tap into imagination and stories, digest things that needs to be digested, sit with things that I need to sit with, put colors to it, and then it doesn't make sense usually in the moment, like something comes out of it, but then you're in constant conversation or constant dialogue with it, but that's the way that I process things.
Tell me about your workshops. That's how I found you. Well, I didn't find you, but I was so curious about how you related adoption with your workshops. And I'm so curious and want to really share that with not just Filipino adoptees, but with all adoptees in general. I think it's a fascinating new way to process emotions. Tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so I'm a body mind movement facilitator. My work is on a holistic approach. So I include the whole body, and when I speak about the body, I mean all of our bodies, right? So not just like the physical, but our mental, emotional, spiritual, all of those things, and the relationship in between them. And as an adoptee, a lot of the things that I personally had to um, dive into and experience and understand in my own adoptee journey was that a lot of the things I couldn't recall, right? Like I remember my life, of course, but there's so many things that I can't recall, but my body still holds these memories. So being able to be in dialogue and just sense certain things that perhaps feel familiar, that certain emotions or sensations that have always been there, trying to dive into like why are they there, where are they coming from, have they always been there, are they there in different situations, or they're there at from morning to night. So part of that was like in my own journey. And so my workshops focus a lot on being able to dive into a theme where emotions and sensations and feelings will come up. And instead of labeling them and saying, okay, this is how I feel, or trying to understand them from a place of just your brain, I really encourage people to include their whole body, whether it's movement, and we're doing art, and just having a language that's not based on words, because a lot of the things, right, that we are dealing with, especially as adoptees, whether you were well, especially if you were adopted before you could speak, but even for all adoptees, right, that's had different journeys, the things that are happening to us in life is, yes, we can explain and we can understand them, but the way our bodies understand them is usually very different, right? like the way that we ingest and digest emotions, the way that we hold on to memories, the way that we create memories, the way that we protect ourselves, like I was speaking about before, like, you know, the rules that we perhaps make, or the ways that we choose to interact with other people or in different situations. So my work is really about allowing ourselves to just be and feel and have a dialogue, create like vocabulary, create vocabulary in the way that we see fit, versus trying to understand ourselves from the outside, which is what we've done as adoptees for our whole life. We've been told, like, this is what you are, this is what you experience, this is what it is. You are you are Swedish, and all of these things that may have been intentionally good, but on an impact level has pushed away a lot of other things, including the way we actually feel about our own journeys and how we actually feel about, you know, our identities as adoptees, which we haven't really been asked, right? Like we're never asked, like, what's your identity as an adoptee? And I think it's really important to not necessarily define it, like come out of my workshop and be like, I know exactly what it is. It's really a place to process, a place to explore, a place to give yourself time to be with these things. And then, like I said, you have a piece of art, you have a piece of writing that comes out of it, maybe a gesture that you felt really called to do, right? And those things we can work with without having to explain ourselves or, you know, define things, because our identities are really kind of, they're so individual and they're so unique, and there's so much for us to still discover.
So it's a workshop, and all of the folks that are involved, they're all adoptees, correct? So it's a safe
Yeah.
space. And then you will guide us through different discussions on perhaps how we feel about something, and then you'll guide us through movement on how to express that. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. So the workshops are for adoptees only, and there's a topic that we explore, and I talk a little bit about the topic. Then we usually go into movement, and I guide movement, and it's very simple. It can be just like place a hand on your heart, or, you know, open up your arms wide, and just kind of like getting into the physical body. And I use the physical body as the vehicle because it's an easy way where people can, you know, if I say, let's connect to your right hand, everyone knows where the right hand is. Versus if I say, let's connect to sadness, and, you know, there's people are like, which one? You know, like which type of sadness? So I use the physical body as the vehicle to explore, and encouraging people to, you know, have that creative choice where if something feels good, let's explore more of the hand, right? Like let's go into the wrist. If things don't feel good, then make it smaller. Let's just explore the right thumb. That's totally fine. It is, you have the creative power in this type of work. So we use the physical body to move and kind of, you know, explore things, allow ourselves to experience. And then that is what we then apply in our reflection, in our art, because then we make art, and we do usually a little bit of writing as well. And it's a process going from like your full body where there are no words whatsoever into some kind of language where that we can all kind of relate to, or we can see, which is art, like colors, texture. And then if there are words, we will add words, but maybe there aren't words. And then we share, usually in small groups, and you share however much or little that you want. And it's, the sharing is really important in my work, because I do believe it's the way to practice, you know, inclusivity and diversity and all bodies and all experiences, and be able to relate to one another, right? To know that, okay, maybe I saw something in your drawing and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't, you know, I thought about that, you know, like that, I can, that's something in me, you know, and even if you don't know what it is, like, something in me resonates, and I don't know what it is, but it's there. So just
Yeah.
building that from within.
I was thankfully able to participate in one of these workshops, and I could say from a perspective, I'm not the most creative in terms of art and in writing. So when I participated, I really found it useful because a lot of us have these frustrations that sit within us. Some of us get really tight bodies, or right, if we're feeling sad, right, the heaviness comes on us. And to be able to express that through movement, where most people, we know how to move, we know how to, interact in such a way that, we do it every day, right? We're always expressing. And this is a different way to express those emotions, to process the words of whether it's belonging or sadness, and we could do it in such a way. I feel like this is such an amazing workshop, and I definitely want to share it. You run workshops that are coming up. How do people connect to this if they want to explore this? Tell me some information.
Sure. So I run monthly workshops. It's usually kind of like the third Saturday, I think, every month, and it's open for all adoptees. You can find me on my website, annagrunstrom.com, and there's a page for adoptees only where you can sign up. Each month has a theme, or each time we meet, it's a theme, and the next monthly for all adoptees will be expectations. So we're going to talk about, or we're going to explore what the expectations is of being an adoptee, expectations, outside expectations, but also for ourselves, right? What we expect from ourselves, and in the ways that we sort of, the ideas that we have our adoptee self or adapted self, and like how the two of them come together. And then in June, I'm actually doing a one-off for transracial adoptees on June 15th. It's a Wednesday, so it's a Wednesday night. And we're doing that one. The theme is assimilations. And we're talking about a lot about, how that has showed up in our lives and how that relates to our identity as transracial adoptees.
Wonderful. So I will include in the show notes on the website as well as on our Instagram. I'll connect all of those resources. So June 15th, Wednesday, June 15th, right, is the transracial. And then Saturday, June 18th is for all adoptees. And I think this is powerful. So we definitely want to make sure that these resources are available for adoptees. It's a completely different way, but it's intriguing to kind of pull this out. So thank you so much for doing all this work in that space. Thank you for sharing your story, Anna. I'm so grateful that you were able to come on and share that with our community. Even though, right, you might be Indonesian, we might be Filipino, there's a very common thread of adoptees, of healing, processing, and creating community. So I just want to say thank you, Anna, for coming on board and sharing all of this with us.
Thank you so much, JD. I'm so excited to have done this interview with you, and I love your work, and thank you so much for your support, and adoptee community, and it's beautiful. So thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. If you definitely love this interview, make sure to tune in to Anna's workshops. We'll have that again posted for you, but also please visit adopteecuentocuento.com, where we'll have all of the information and guides to other resources for our community. Here, we really allow and promote and provide a platform for adoptees to share the different experiences that they have, but also what does our greater community want to have for us, our voices, and also for others. So thank you again. Paalam.